Good morning. Welcome to Living in the Promised Land. This is your host, Mark Shmueli, and today we have Madhu Sharma from Akron, Ohio. Madhu, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning.
Good morning. And before we start, we'll talk about what Madhu's background is, um, why she's here, and what we're going to learn about a very complicated subject that is in the news. It's one of these things that gets thrown at us in the news, but we don't really know how it works. To be honest, most immigration lawyers don't know how it works because it's done through the government almost exclusively and the agencies that the government contracts with in a normal sense. But we're going to talk about the new normal or the new abnormal that we're living in today, and we're going to get to that. But first, we always talk about something in the news, and it may not be the main thing in the news because there are about 20 main things in the news, and I like to cover something that I think is a little bit of a possible game changer, something to kind of keep your eye on, and something that is discussed in the media in a way that I barely pay attention to because I don't care about, because mainline media not only is completely out to lunch on so many things that are happening now, but they're out to lunch on um, um, culture, often out to lunch on the culture, out to lunch on what they see as the real America. So, for example, they see a they'll see a song about the army, and they will automatically assume, or they'll see a band from the South, or they'll see a musician, and they'll say, this person must have these views. They'll see an athlete, they'll see somebody in the NASCAR world, and often that is true. We do have parts of the United States that have ideologies that go a certain way, and we can see that in voting patterns, but nothing is a monolith. And not only is nothing a monolith, but there's a lot more in common than sets us apart. And certainly that's why we are where we are today. Absolutely. It's why we've been where we were historically. It's why the powers that be have always not wanted regular people, working people, whatever you might call folks, to not be together, to be divided on race, to be divided on gender and anything else, when in reality there's a lot more together, which is why somebody like Bernie Sanders threatened the establishment, which is why both parties were trying to get rid of that ideology. It's why we've talked about why we see Zoran Mandami being opposed by his own party along with the Republicans, because the kind of thing of lowering the rent, keeping health care, that's the same thing. And I've talked about when I was in Iowa during the primaries in 2020, and Bernie Sanders was at a forum, and he talked about rural health to a black and brown audience. Because one of the doctors that brought it up to him at this forum was at the Black and Brown Forum was a South Asian doctor, and she brought that up to him. And so these are the connections that people don't like to see. These are the stereotypes that people don't like to hear. And this is what I talked about a little bit when I was in Springfield, and we'll talk about Springfield because it's not far from where Madhu grew up. And Ohio geography, Madhu is from Akron, Ohio, and Ohio geography, even though I've been there many times, still kind of boggles me, but it's there. So Zach Bryan, who many people hadn't heard of, especially, people that the boomers that run our TV networks, and also people in urban areas hadn't necessarily heard that much about him. And this song came out last week, or that he put out, called Bad News. And it was your general, hey, my buddies are in jail, the system is fucked up. And he had a line in there where first he talked about the police, and he said that, call them cocky motherfuckers. And then he talked about ICE is going to break your door down. Well, okay, before I even knew about that, all of a sudden is blowing up that Kristi Noem and the ICE spokesperson both had statements. The ICE spokesperson had a statement which was something along the lines of "shut up and dribble," and Kristi Noem's was, "you're disrespecting the troops." Now, people won't know about Zach Bryan. He is came out of the military. He wanted to stay in the Navy. That's all he saw in the future of his life. And he formed his first band in the Navy, recorded in while he was on duty in the Navy in in like I think a motel or a room. And they talk about like padding up the walls, recording, and that got out on YouTube and he became instant. I mean, his first live show, I was listening to an interview with him curiously by Bruce Springsteen. The two of them were talking, and he said that the first live show was the Iowa County Fair at 1,500 people. So he hasn't been around that long. He's huge. They don't know what to make of him, so they're trying to shut him down. And you saw people saying, well, rural America isn't going to stand for that. And they're talking about, listen to Lee Greenwood. I mean, I don't think he has more than one song. But if you ask anybody, name more than one Lee Greenwood song. So no, no, it was the same as, when we were kids and it was like Bob Hope. Go back to Bob Hope, get rid of, it's this whole censoring on a lot of ways, and it's kind of interesting. So, but you heard about that, right?
Yeah, I did. I'm not as well versed as you. I learned about him because of the controversy, actually, right? And then, I did the deep dive. Because you didn't invite me to speak with you today because I'm culturally with it, right? So, but I do feel like there is definitely something in the air these days, right? Bad Bunny performing at the Super Bowl, this news story, everything is a complete disconnect. I don't think it's different, frankly, than it has been throughout different other generations. Like we know artists and um, comedians and controversy that has come up that's been critical of the local leadership, the president, the politics of America. That is just part of our history, right? And part of our culture as Americans is we get to criticize and expect more of our leaders. What's different, really, is that there's been a response to it from government and somewhat of a backlash. And that,
Fast, but
our
fast.
leadership goes to Twitter now to respond, right? That is very different. And to be honest, based on what I do, and you didn't speak much about me, but I feel
But we're
that I have
we're
to
going
tune
to,
some of that out, but it's
right.
also the place I go to remember that it's not just immigrants and refugees that are under attack every day, right? It reminds me that I don't know how else to say it, but it's gonna, the battle is gonna power to the people is the answer. It's only gonna always be the answer, frankly, right?
Yes.
Um, and it just reminds me that there is a collective of us trying to resist. And I feel less alone.
Yeah, well, and just observing. I mean, like, you're right, and we're going to get to all of that. This is just sort of what hit me this week, and and again, like it hit me as a pop up, and I was like, wow. And I mean, first of all, it's funny. He's not even all that country, but that's a different story. But this happened, when I was in high school and Born in the USA came out, and Reagan was massively popular, and he had a flag on there, and he was in jeans. But then it was like you listen to it, and you listen to the anti-Vietnam, the people coming back from Vietnam. It happened when, there's a fabulous movie. I think it's on Netflix, a little documentary called Johnny Cash and Nixon. And it's, I mean, people try to put Johnny Cash into a place, and he said, the only reason I'm not going to stop wearing black until there are no more poor people. And so, these are artists. They're people out there, and you can't co-opt them, and you can't make things insensitive. And what you're saying is important. Is like all of us, that the backlash isn't the fact that they felt like they needed to jump out, that they knew that other artists, like where was their Alan Jackson, where were their people, because what they're doing is a lot less maybe popular, and there were reasons that people went where they went. And we talk about the lack of a resistance from the politicians, and we're going to talk about it, but in what we do as lawyers, as directors, as of refugee agencies, etc., that we need the people. And we've talked about, when we had Judge Slavin on a couple of weeks ago, she talked about how much the main thing she was proud of, a long tenured judge working on the alligator Alcatraz, now long tenured immigration judge, who was proud of her nephew for being, I think it's in Boston, or maybe it's in Virginia, in the waiting room filming ICE getting people coming out of courtrooms, which could have been her courtroom. And that's what she's most proud of. And that's what I think we are most proud of, I think, is when we see people out there putting their bodies on the line. When we see uh, all kinds of people, when we see
Mhm.
that, we're like, wow, we're understood because it wasn't. And so, Madhu, I'm going to let you talk a lot more about specifically what you do, and I'm just going to say Madhu is the executive director of the Akron International Institute, which sounds like a prestigious college, but it's you can talk about how it got the name if there was an academic bent to it, but it is a refugee resettlement, legal assistance to the community, and Akron is a city where, like a lot of the Midwest, where refugees are settled. So, Madhu, tell us about the institute.
So yeah, it's the International Institute of Akron.
Okay, see,
And we got our name. There actually are international institutes throughout the United States. They came out of the YWCA, right?
tell
And
us what that is.
the YWCA, the Young Women's
Christian Association.
Christian Association, early 1930s, I think. They were huge in New York, and their director went around the Midwest. They were actually one of the nation's first settlement houses, which essentially means all the new immigrant women and children were provided back in the day. It was called assimilation services, right? But they were provided with kind of access, community access services, right? Whether that meant English language classes, whether that meant, oh, this is how you navigate life in New York City. This is where you go to get your medical care. This is how you get a job. It was essentially social support services for women and children who were coming as new immigrants to America. Um, and their director at the time had a vision to create these resettlement houses, expand them throughout the country. And the International Institute of Akron in the early 1900s was part of that. So in 1916, we were founded by a local Lebanese immigrant who had a potato chip company here. He's kind of got a very famous potato chip tin, actually. People who collect tins would know of him, but it's a Salem
Hmm,
potato chip company.
hmm.
Um, and yeah, many people don't know that in Ohio there were a lot of famous potato chips. Mike Sells is still here actually. So anyhow, I think out of that movement, IIA was we were already working to help refugees and immigrants. We became a division of the International Institutes, and the International
Hmm.
Institutes exist in almost every state of the nation. And all of us are now affiliated with the USCRI, U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, one of the national non-NGOs that provides resettlement services to new arriving refugees. IIA, I'm pretty excited about this because I'm an immigration attorney by trade. Um, it also was the first nonprofit in the state of Ohio that got accredited by the Department of Justice to provide legal immigration services to
Hmm.
immigrants. So we were the first agency that was a nonprofit that was allowed to provide those services, outside of being a lawyer, right? Kind of like paralegal services for immigrants, right? In the 1950s.
Hmm. Wow.
So I'm the executive director here, but I am an immigration attorney. I am not from Akron, so I just want to qualify anything we talk about Akron. I am kind of new to Akron. I've lived here for 10 years, which I still feel like I'm not new. I'm new to Akron because we went through a pandemic. We've been through two Trump administrations since I've lived here.
Not
Um,
through.
it's
Not.
not the Ohio I grew up in. And I would say that I am an immigrant from India. I came in the 1970s, and I left Ohio when I was 18. have lived throughout the Midwest, and then I went out to California and lived there for about 18 years before coming back to help care for aging parents. But since I've been back to Akron, anything we talk about, I have to tell you the history of this community is fascinating and its ties to the history of U.S. immigration policies, right? There has been no wave of immigrants that have come to America that haven't ended up in Akron, Ohio, in some populations just to serve within the manufacturing industry. Akron's part of the Rust Belt, right? Meaning we were a hub of manufacturing in the mid-century. And out of that came many jobs, a lot of controversy related to environmental pollution, as you can imagine, and race and environmental pollution overlapping. But it also had and still has a significant foothold in the manufacturing industry as it exists today. And the one of the things that's allowed those industries to survive in the Rust Belt are immigrants and refugees as well. And refugees are, of course, they're included in the greater, bigger definition of what is an immigrant, right? Um, but so IIA serves not just refugees, but other people who've come from other countries to live in our community here. Summit County and some of the neighboring counties. We provide employment services, legal services, English language classes, job skills, life skills classes, um, interpreting services to the local hospitals and courts, and translation services, document translation to anyone who needs it. And then we also have a legal department and a social services department. And I was a private immigration attorney. I can't say how valuable it is to have legal services for immigrants connected to access to social services for immigrants. Our legal team and our social services team work very closely to help people who are going through the process of, stabilizing their immigration status in America. Because it is a gruesome, difficult process, and everybody needs a social worker who's going through it.
Right, in any world, it's a slow process. So people, are always hearing, obviously in the climates before here, uh, people talked about vetting, super vetting, all of these things that get thrown out there without any uh discussion. And people, I talk about this a lot. Nobody wants to know every detail. Nobody needs to know what's on every form. Just like, and I use this example all the time, but it's okay to beat a dead horse. Um, I hate climate change. Do I really like when my friends who are scientists understand when I ask a question and 30 minutes later they're talking about CO2 levels and all this stuff? It's too much for me to absorb, and frankly, I don't care. What do I need to do? Dumb it down for me. Just dumb it down for me. And that's fair, and that's fair on all of these things. And I think what happens is you get like this. I mean, we have two major political parties in the US, and you get one side that runs scared, clearly runs scared. And, we're waiting for the next shoe to drop and the next thing to happen that's bad, so that we can, people retreat and it becomes a discussion of based out of fear. And the other side that just comes out with a story of fear from the beginning and has all of their receipts and talks about certain things. And so this is a discussion that people have, and they back off because they don't know what to do. And now you have some people doing things that are really radical because they just can't stand what they see. But in the case of refugees, you really do have populations that come as a group and are in a community and need to be integrated. And I'm going to want you to talk about that. But one of the things, when I was teaching at the University of Maryland, I did microcosm. I had my students do a paper on how refugees or immigrants were integrated into small towns, cities around the US. And one of them was Dayton, Ohio, which it fascinates me because in 2009, they put out a Dayton welcoming, like a compact, a 30-page document, which has all the things you're talking about. It says police. This is what people aren't going to understand things. This is their culture and all of that. And we had somebody here in Maryland, uh, from Ghana. It was years ago, but I remember he was a the son of one of the embassy workers in Ghana. And when the police stopped and pointed their gun and said, "Stop," he had a flashback because in his country, if the police say stop, they're going to shoot you. And he ran and they shot him in the back. People have different relationships with law enforcement, with community assistance, etc. And so there each there were needs that were defined, and then there were instructions for people in the town. And it's a really and one of the jobs I had when I was job to jobbing before law school was I worked with a management company where there were a lot of recent immigrants from Central America who were rural, and they didn't understand you don't put sanitary napkins in the toilet. You don't the concept of loitering is not a concept because the concept of, I drink alone, you know, George Thorogood wasn't making it in those countries. Nobody drinks alone. They drink with their friends in a parking lot, and but in the US you don't drink in public. Like is loitering. It's not a crime there. So people have, there was so much that Dayton as a city took it on. And it's funny because one of my students was so excited to do it. His dad went to the college and he said, like, and they were ardent Catholics. And I really, it's such a Catholic town, and the Catholic Church has always, it's their mandate, is to work with immigrants. So that's what I'm thinking of. So to become a refugee, like, what's the process for somebody from soup to nuts?
All right. And you don't want me to go on, I don't want to get inside baseball here. So,
No,
um,
you're sitting there
well,
in
how can
X
how
country.
can I simplify this for listeners? I think that it's really important to identify that historically and in the past, and I'm saying in the recent past, like before January 20th, the Department of State was the division of government that was responsible for vetting refugees. That vetting was done overseas by the Program of Refugees and Migration. We call it PRM, right? That vetting process was extensive, right? Nine steps of vetting to ensure that we weren't allowing people to come to the United States as refugees who might be a security threat or a threat to public safety. But the other piece of it is they had to meet the UN definition of a refugee, right? So that had to be a person that was persecuted based on one of five grounds: race, religion, help me out, race, religion, nationality,
Political
political
opinion,
opinion, and ethnicity
a
was
social
this?
group, particular
Social
social
group.
group.
Sorry, yes,
Yes.
sorry. Social group. And persecution had to be on the account of one of those five grounds. Um, and it also had to be, and I'm saying this like it's past tense because unfortunately I feel like it's past tense. And it also had to be perpetrated by the government or by people that the government, a foreign government was unable and unwilling to control, right? So people that the government was unable and unwilling to control. So the definition of a refugee is the same definition that was adopted for asylum seekers in the United States. And the U.S. State Department, through the Program for Refugees and Migration, would do these circuit rides where they would go to different camps and places where refugees who had fled already and were in third countries were staying so they could go through the UN process of vetting. Once the UN vets them, then the State Department vets them. And then that process used to take 4 years. Sometimes it would be streamlined, but most of the time it would take 4 years. There's some exceptions, right? We know the Afghan resettlement was not even conducted by the Department of State, right? People were on airplanes and airlifted out, and it was done stateside, right? But historically, all of the processing of refugees would happen overseas in camps and predominantly on the other side of the globe, right? Very few Department of State process, very little Department of State processing was happening here on the Americas side of the globe, right? That's why we had so many asylum seekers and have so many asylum seekers, because we don't have camps, so to speak, in other than maybe two places in the Americas side of the globe. That is very intentional. It's a diplomatic or I would say, an extension of American diplomacy. And it always has been an extension of American diplomacy to determine which refugees we will take from which parts of the world and how many, right? That's why the numbers of refugees in every fiscal year is always determined by the President of the United States. in consult with Congress, right? So the president gets to put out what we call the presidential determination. You'll see
Mm.
it in the papers called the PD. It's too bad there's so many acronyms, right, Mark?
Hmm.
Because that's why people don't understand this. But
In
so there's
part,
a
yeah.
presidential determination. It's usually publicized around September. And then, Congress, when they're
Functioning.
not shut down,
Yeah, when they're functioning, yeah.
decides to, yeah, they consult with the president and they approve it or, engage in some process of changing it, right, with the president. So it's done in concert with the two branches of government. And the Trump administration historically has had the lowest numbers of refugees, or the presidential determination throughout the history of the first Trump administration were historical lows.
So what are the numbers? What are, just so people know what the numbers, like
So,
before and
s-
after?
I'm going to skip the pandemic year,
Yeah.
but the highest number in Biden year was 125,000. And it was around 100,000 during the Obama administration. And the I would say the Trump administration, I think the lowest year outside of the pandemic was 15,000. So abysmally, it's just a drastic difference, right? And the agencies that provide resettlement services, like the International Institute of Akron, we're nationwide. There's a resettlement agency in every state, at least one, if not many, right? And we're local NGOs. We're not, we're affiliated with national resettlement agencies who contract with the federal government to provide resettlement services, but we are not necessarily tied in with federal government, right? We're just funded in part by them. So I would say that the way the resettlement system has worked in the past has been a combination of local politics because, the president and Congress have to agree on how many people and from what countries, and what parts of the world, I should say. And then also diplomatic relations, right? The Department of State was always key in helping to shape this strategy. It was always something that served U.S. foreign policy in the past. Um, and then also local communities, right? Because the end of the story was refugees will come to local communities and resettlement services are provided by agencies, local NGOs who are getting funds from federal government, from the federal government, the Department of State technically. Now recently, there is, and there, this hasn't been highly publicized, but in this next fiscal year, the Department of State and the Program for Refugees and Migration will not be responsible for vetting refugees anymore. The entire process of vetting and determining which refugees will come will be part of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which sits tucked into the Department of Health and Human Services. It's going
Yes.
to be a U.S. side endeavor, right? Because Office of Refugee Resettlement has many responsibilities, only one of which, frankly, is processing refugees now. That is the future of refugee resettlement. We don't really understand yet what the vetting will be, and how the vetting will be conducted. Not to say there will be no vetting, it just hasn't been told to us, right? Which is difficult because when you're resettling individuals, you also want to be able to prepare local communities for what to expect, not just culturally about who's coming, but also, some assurances that people have gone through some process of vetting, whether it's stateside or not, right? Whether it's overseas or here, we have to kind of explain to local politicians, state officials, but also local school districts, hospitals, like what the process is. Public safety officials in the local community need to understand these things. So it's hard to answer those questions at the moment because we don't have answers ourselves as resettlement agencies. And our national partners, who are predominantly based in Washington, D.C., um, in New York, I think, are not necessarily in the know either. So we're learning as we go. There was a leak. You may have seen in the New York Times there was a leak a few weeks back that the number for 2026 The presidential determination for refugees is 2,500, a new historic low. And then there is significant talk that and frankly, this was part of the leak, that the majority of those 90% of those individuals will be Afrikaners. So what does this mean for
Afrikaners
us?
meaning Afrikaners. For those of us who haven't thought, most people in the United States had not really thought of South Africa, and it certainly was not in the front pages in a few decades for the most part.
Mhm.
Maybe the World Cup, but I don't think the US made that one. So there's not a lot of thought about what's going on. And I mean, there are things going on in South Africa, but for the most part, the Afrikaans were in were the they're this set up. They defeated the British and were in charge of South Africa for most of the last century, a little before. And
They were Dutch settlers, correct?
yes, they were Dutch
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
not Dutch term. They were Dutch, and they set up a system of apartheid,
Mhm.
where black South African blacks had were set up in little segregated Bantustans. They were set up, and we know Nelson Mandela was jailed. He came back. They had an election. They had reconciliation, but it was a horrible. It's not apartheid is not the kind of government that you want to emulate. Put it that way. And so they were. So there's been land disputes because of and land disputes meaning there's within South Africa, and people feel wronged, as often happens uh in countries like that where you have a massive power inequality. And they are claiming that they are having their land taken from them, and they're under threat. And so we're talking about 4 years in normal times. I think it was about 4 weeks once they applied for refugee status that they were here. They landed in Dulles Airport with more baggage than, you know, lots of baggage. They landed in Dulles Airport, and I don't know if they waived the baggage fees, but if they did, they were paying a lot, and they were going somewhere. And there's the first, I think, 100 of them or so. So, was that the fastest you've seen refugees vetted?
Yeah, and so even when Afghans were airlifted out of Afghanistan, there was a 6 month to 10 month vetting in US military bases
Yes.
throughout the United States. They were contained and vetted. So I don't know what the vetting process
Or
was.
foreign military bases. They were also taken to Kuwait and other foreign military bases. Yes.
Correct, correct. And so we knew there was a vetting going on because people were waiting inside bases for to complete processing, right? I don't know, and we don't know, and it has not been disclosed to us what vetting processes took place for the populations that are being resettled from South Africa, the Afrikaners. Also, I think I want to point out that historically, every population of refugee has been recognized by the United Nations as having met the definition of a refugee, which I described kind of messy, but I did describe it, right? It does require that you were persecuted by the government and you meet that definition of persecution. I don't want to get in the weeds here, but there is definitely a legal standard for what constitutes persecution. And then also that you didn't persecute others. You
Oh,
weren't engaged in the persecution of others. And so I do feel this is the first population that the United States has resettled that the UN has not touched with a 10-foot pole. The UN has not recognized Afrikaners as being legitimate refugees, right? To my knowledge. Do you know different, Mark? I feel that
no, I
this
don't
is a
know.
very unique
No.
population where the President of the United States of America has defined these individuals as refugees, and we don't know what definition is being used. We're hearing, we know, we watch the news, media, or what was it, press? There were some press meetings that were happening with with South Africa at the time. We heard blanket statements that weren't really based in history and fact. And all I know is that people have been already resettled to Wisconsin, Idaho, and Florida who are Afrikaners. and that the future next year, if refugees will be resettled at all, they're most likely mostly going to be people from or Afrikaners from South Africa. So I don't anticipate the International Institute of Akron. We haven't resettled anyone since January 20th of 2025. One of the executive orders was to suspend refugee resettlement. It's gone through litigation. It doesn't look like that litigation is going to find that that executive order was in fact a violation of several laws, right? Not the least of which is the Refugee Act, the Administrative Procedures Act, the Constitution. There's so many aspects of that executive
No,
order
it's abnormal.
that have been attacked, but we happen to have a Ninth Circuit panel that's reviewing it. That's all Trump or George W. Bush appointees. So it's not looking good.
Mm.
And we haven't welcomed anybody through the refugee resettlement process as we used to know it since January 20th.
Yeah, and it's got to be also noted that South Africa did bring the International Court of Justice case of genocide against Israel, and the United States has been,
Mhm.
in both
Notable.
administrations, has been
Mhm.
virulently against that. And so, this is I mean, be it the arts, be it the Kennedy Center, be it the refugee program, be it the National Guard. One thing is, it is a power stamp, and so, we're talking about this, we're getting into these, people need to understand this, Madhu. But the important thing, the reason we just do this podcast to bitch about all the things that are bad. Plenty, I could send you to anybody to talk about that, But what's critical about what you're doing and what's remarkable about what you're doing as a place is that one, you're still standing, you're still moving, you're still standing, and you've got a community there. And the community is still standing. And what I saw in Springfield, this community's not going anywhere, and that's and there's a resistance, and there's an awareness, and be it arts, be it what have you, people are saying, whether it's we know we don't have this level of power now, we're going to push for it that way, or we're just going to keep our communities, we as people, not whoever's elected or what have you, are going to define what we want. And I personally, as hard as it is, as bad as things can be, is what you described is just horrific when you're talking about, because you're talking about refugees, we all know that, we see Palestine. Now, people don't. That's a genocide. So people being moved off their land is a different story altogether. But we know there are refugees in Congo, Sudan, massive. That there's starvation. There's these things happening. That there are people that need safety. That they need to be in this community. They don't choose it, but they need it. And we know that there's climate change refugees. That's something that's happening also. And so wherever they may go, and we know there is this need, and we know that in your case, you're blocked right now, and there's nothing you can do. And there's just the same thing as we as lawyers, Carlos Castaneda had the statement, he's never felt more helpless when he was on the show about a month ago. And there's a truth to that. But it's also, we've been dealing with a simmering, um, 4 years of waiting for people in refugee camps. I mean, we see this on the West Bank. People have been in refugee camps since 1948. There's this simmering where we're just going to keep a low level. We're going to keep low level class division, and people are saying no. No, we want legitimate equality. We don't want our neighbors thrown out. And there's this shock and awareness that we've never seen before. And I know, like, the South Africa thing came out for a little while, but it's sort of a joke. It's also to people, but it's also, when you put it the way of, like, this is who's not coming. This is what's really not happening. These are people who aren't getting, there's food insecurity, all these
So
kinds
the
of things.
ones who are not coming
Hmm.
we've already resettled people from Congo to the Akron area. We've already resettled people from Burma to the Akron area. We've already resettled people from Afghanistan. And they have family members who were waiting to follow to join them or come as well as refugees that they've left behind. families are essentially being torn apart. There's significant depression over how long it's taking. Can you imagine being the first to get out? I mean, you can because you're Jewish, right? But being the only ones to get out and waiting to find the rest of the family to get them here, knowing that we're setting up, we're preparing, we're ready to welcome you, and our community is behind us. We're getting jobs, we're starting to navigate life here, but we left people behind. Like you
and
can
yeah,
never move on. And the
right.
sadness of like the entire time I've been in resettlement, which has been about only 10 years of my career, um, it has
10 years is a
been
long time, I do. It's a
it,
long
it,
time.
it seems like a long time, but to me, 10 years of being an immigration lawyer was right when I was in my suite, right when
Right.
I decided, okay, now I know what I'm doing, right? So I feel like I'm finally at this point. Takes 10 years kind of to become an expert at something, right? But I like to surround myself with people who don't have all the answers because what I'm
Right.
realizing is in these days in our work, serving refugees and immigrants, there is no consistency. It's all over the place. And so the experience I've had with refugee resettlement has consistently been what has been deemed to be not normal, right? Because the very beginning of it was the Trump administration where we reduced refugee resettlement to such a number that families got separated. Some of them made it, others were waiting and waiting. And now, how long is that wait going to be, right? Oh, maybe it's going to take 7 years now, right? We don't know. And now we're starting to see the end of the story, which is, or you're never going to get reunited, right? And then we want people to integrate. And so, you think about the trauma of what a person fled. And I'm saying a person because we want to say refugees in general, but people flee for many reasons their homeland. And some of them are asylum seekers, some of them are refugees, some of them come through some other immigration path, but they flee something, and there is almost always a story of who was left behind. And part of the beauty of U.S. immigration law has always been, but we want to keep families together, so we're going to make ways that you can have your family members follow to join you if you found an avenue in, right? And we're shutting those down. And it's
Face it,
devastating, it's heartbreaking,
I
it's
mean, the best part of U.S.
breaking
immigration,
hearts of people, right?
the best part of immigration law was when the government just said, "All right, we got a big country here. It's not bad to have people. They build communities, and we're just going to get out of the way." Because generally, when they jump in to make laws, it ain't good. When they jump in to push something, it's not good. Like we talked about in the late '90s, it's scapegoating, it's reactionary, and and at this stage, you know, it's my contention, my belief that we have to if we don't elevate the communities and talk about it in a way that's not intellectually mature, but just like, no, this guy. What are you doing?
Humanizing,
Yeah,
right?
like when people are yelling at ICE pulling somebody, what the hell are you doing? Like,
Right.
it's like that's why people looked at Gaza. They were like, that's a freaking hospital. That's a
Mhm.
person,
Mhm.
and we can't.
Most Americans do feel that way, don't you think, Mark? And
Oh, I do.
that's
I
the
do.
that's the
Well,
safe.
no, no, I don't. I think that people, that's an inclination.
Mhm.
I think it's all, and go back to Zach Bryan. It's like it sometimes can take a while because when it's people also look for something to blame. It's very natural and it's a
We'll see
mentally
on
unhealthy.
Saturday, right?
Well, I'm
We'll
sorry.
see
Was
on
that?
Saturday with the No Kings March because
Oh,
what I've noticed, and just to pivot this to the possibilities and the hope is that what I am seeing and what we are seeing in our Akron community here is that,
hmm.
and we saw this in Springfield as well. We've seen it throughout the state of Ohio, frankly, is that people, a deep red state, right? Our politics is very red. We're essentially in bed with JD Vance and his cohort at the moment, politically. But the people that live in the state, they're not people are responding to the way individuals are being treated, right? And it's about to get worse, um, meaning that, Ohio is about to implement SNAP cuts as of November 1st.
Yeah, what is that? Just
SNAP,
explain it to me.
it's the food assistance programs that we have nationwide, right? And they're the Big Beautiful Bill or the One Big Beautiful Bill, whatever it's called. I feel like it's many states have already begun to implement the cuts in assistance to poor individuals, right? And Ohio is one of those states, right? And that goes into effect November 1st. We're all kind of scrambling to mobilize to make sure we're filling the gaps. Refugees is one of the populations that's being cut off of public benefits. So, add to it that, already people are struggling now. Within the first 5 years of their admission to the United States, they're not going to be qualified for food assistance. And they're coming from refugee camps. It's shocking, right? And that's just refugees, also other categories of immigrants, some of whom have never been qualified, so I don't know why they're in the bill. But the point is, Americans and Ohioans are not happy. And so I do think the marches that happen on Saturday, the No Kings marches, it's promising to see people come out to oppose the policies coming out of this administration, whether it be state policies in Ohio or federal policies. And I do think for refugees and immigrants and undocumented immigrants in the Akron area, there's been a strong showing of donor support and community support. There's an entire group of interfaith leaders in Akron who have mobilized to provide support services to undocumented immigrants by taking them to their fingerprint appointments or their appointments at ICE. And they're essentially
Here too.
escorting them. They're visiting them in detention centers. People care, is my point.
No, I agree.
Americans
I
care.
agree. Yeah, no, I agree. And when I was in, I can see I can make one day into 10 years. I can experiences hit me that way. But I think I've mentioned on the show that, I was who doesn't get out of the big city to just say I need to get out and I need to go somewhere for a week and check up with their friends in Lancaster, near Lancaster, Ohio, at the sort of heart of where Appalachia enters. Probably the one of the more Trumpier parts of the state, and so I took a day and I went to Springfield uh, and I interviewed Vilas Dorsenville, the director of the Springfield of the Haitian Community Center there, and I also just went around and talked to people around town. And um, one of the high school, I went to a cafe on the edge of town, kind of edgy cafe, and there was a high school student girl, and her friend came in, and they just sat down and we were talking for a while, and she just said to me, "Thank you for doing this, for being here. My uncle." They were talking about that day. That was a day like the or that when that when Trump talked about the cats and dogs, eating on the debate, and they talked about how it affected the town, how um it really shocked the town and affected it. And she said, "Look, I want to stay here." And my uncle, my grandfather, difficult to talk to. And I said, "So who's good?" Like, and she said, "The teachers are." So, and I said, "Don't be surprised, because they're there working with people and helping them, the teachers, and everybody has to go to school." And these kids were like, "What is this?" These are like, it's a human reaction. And they always talk about outside agitators. Well, Springfield's not a town that has a ton of skinheads, and all of a sudden there were skinheads. There were more death threats than there were people. I mean, literally, the small Episcopalian college there, um, German, no, it wasn't Lutheran, sorry, there had to close down for a week. I talked to the people in the library, because I had to use it, and so I talked to them, and they closed down for a week because of death threats. And why? Because it was an institution in the town. And so uh, outside agitators, right? And they were horrified. And people are, you know, I mean, one of the per capita, I believe, refugee resettlement states is the one that Ilhan Omar went to after she came from Somalia, which is not Minnesota, it was North Dakota. She was settled there. And I believe, well, she went to college there, and I know people that have taught there, and there was a large Iraqi community. Now, there were violence against them, and this is one of the things that's happening too. But um, when you when you create that, and in this case, yes, you had somebody, J.D. Vance incited violence. He is not stupid. He knew what he was doing. And he's smooth. Now, is it a majoritarian way of thinking? No. Is he a better politician because he's simple, gets to a point and says it when our people are like, well, do need super vetting, and we do need to make sure once you put people in a situation where they are less, there's a beautiful quote that I think says it all, and I think you might know who said this quote, that if you put somebody in handcuffs, they look like a criminal. That was you, and
I
you
take it
you had that
yeah,
quote, and I
yeah,
love that quote because
yeah.
when we see, it's the same thing as once you know you detain people, they know you put someone in detention, then they have to go through an immigration court in a room by themselves in a jail uniform. Once
You've
I was
criminalized an entire population of individuals who are, and we've historically done this. This is not new, but the way in which we're doing it now, um, uh, I feel like there is a counter movement. And we've had these throughout history in American immigration policy. Um, I'm waiting for that movement to begin to win because it sure does feel like we're losing this battle. In every arena, we're seeking to fight it. But you're right, as immigration lawyers, this is the first time in my 27-year career as an immigration lawyer that I feel so not alone. People are trying to understand. We had local non-lawyer community organizers doing Know Your Rights presentations for immigrants. They were
yes,
they were getting trained up by us and other um, uh, leaders or immigration attorneys, and they were going out and they were spreading the word. Um, and I think that there will be I hope that there will continue to be a resistance to what we are doing with ICE and how we're shutting down essentially we're closing up our country. And, we can talk all day about what that's going to do our
yes,
workforce and our food prices but the truth is it's not what most Americans believe in, right? And
no, and we
so
all
many
have, well,
immigrants are
yeah,
already part of our neighborhoods and our communities, and
yep,
they're already, we are already, you know, half my friends, this sounds so absurd, but half of the people I know on my street, I'm the only immigrant they know, right? I just feel like, and I feel like there's so much, we're so integrated already in these small towns that we've come to live in. And I'm not, I'm a bit of a city girl myself. I spent most of my adult life in Los Angeles. But I do
yeah,
feel like when I come to the small town Ohio, so many things about it make me understand why we pit big cities and small towns against each other, and yet why the small towns are where immigrants sometimes thrive, right?
absolutely.
Because it's the
I mean, when
space in
they,
which you have the most connection, right? In small spaces or smaller towns.
oh, absolutely. And we know that the history in Ohio, the history in Pennsylvania, the history. I mean, look, when my family came to to New York at first, and okay, but then they moved to South Florida, which was small, and that was where like you can kind of breathe and you can be like anything else, and I think the feeling that I got out of with what I know and where I've been and all of this, and in Springfield was it's a race for them. I mean, this is what we're against, and you could be against something without focusing on them. Like, I think, every single thing that's said, like people say, yeah, but, you know, some politician who's supposed to be on our side says, yeah, but we've gone much further. We're much better than I don't care. Like, I'm never going to think, I mean, JD Vance is, he's a cynical player, whatever he is. He's just a, zealot he's a climber. But the people that run it, the Stephen Millers, the ones who really are what they want to create a white supremacist nation, which is what they want. They want to weed out. To do that, you have got to destroy the communities. And there's a certain, once you get a couple of generations ensconced into a community, it's too late. You can't do it. And so, Springfield, the Haitian population, which is a 1/3 of the city came in 2014 was the first big wave. So there's a certain amount of years. So that this is one of the reasons I think, that I saw that they're trying to make it so that they leave. But once you've been there and you've had your kids and you've integrated into the city and you may have, married locals, you may have been, then it's too late. It's too late. And so recent refugees, cutting them off is one way to do it. That's out there. But I think that it's what you're doing by standing there. By what you're doing is by protecting, being there with the community, and also the community's also building strong institutions for themselves. That is as much resistance, and our resistance is a lot different than it could have been before, than it might have been before. But this is something that we kind of didn't notice, and people have to realize we have to affirmatively say this is the country we want, this is the state we want. And I think that's a battle that's going on in Springfield, and I believe that the younger folks, the city council there, it is saying, no, we don't want to lose him. I mean, from the economic standpoint too, there were all these companies that would leave, and there's that, but there's also a false hope, because as we know, part of the evil that these guys are doing is that they are all the things that are being cut in Appalachia too. They're being cut there, and I've got a friend who is in charge for the governor of in the department where they school nutrition, and she has the area of Appalachia and Ohio, Southern Ohio, and she's got to go to places that are all white and all pretty poor, and the superintendents don't like it. The school boards are political, and they say don't complain to the governor, but we know that this is their fight at the top, that they can't serve their people. And I just wanted to just end on something, that I did want to bring in, is that what struck me was the governor of your state, who's Mike DeWine, the outgoing governor, was in Springfield this summer, and temporary protected status is how a lot of people are here, and Trump across the board has ended it, which basically temporary protected status means the president has the power to look at a country and say, look, the people that are here can't go back there. Sometimes it's a natural disaster. Sometimes it's a complete breakdown in government. Think Somalia, Haiti, Afghanistan, Syria. And when it gets better, you can take it up. Generally, they don't, because it goes for a long time and then people get ensconced here, and that's different. But certainly, sometimes it does. And in the case of Afghanistan, they've decided Afghanistan is fine. They've both wanted to go to war against Venezuela and decided that it's safe for people. So this is how bad that is. And Haiti does not even have commercial flights yet. Yet they're saying that it's going to be safe, and it's absurd, and it's going to destroy the community, and it's not there's no reason for it. And Governor DeWine said, well, we will implement whatever comes out of the White House, which is a shell. That's a shell of serving your community. And it's also bowing the knee to authoritarianism.
Well, he's also a lame duck governor, right? So he's not there's really no political will on by this particular leader, right? So um all I can say is that we serve people that have temporary protected status that have come from Ukraine, Venezuela, Haiti, Afghanistan, Burma even, right?
Oh.
So there's several categories, even Nepal. We've got, many people have lost their status, or their status is going to expire early next 2026. They're already part of our communities. They already have key jobs within our communities. They
Right.
already, just our neighbors and friends, right? And we know that it's a lot, thousands and thousands of people are going to lose their status. This is how we create undocumented immigrants in the United States, is we strip people's status away from them. Like, frankly, I'm a naturalized citizen. when is it going to stop? Like, when are we going to stop villainizing and criminalizing individuals when it is our own failure in immigration policy that's creating undocumented immigrants, right?
Right.
I have to say, in Akron, we're so fortunate to have local government. Our county executive and our mayor are very, we are a welcoming community, Summit County and the city of Akron. And our local officials are supporting the International Institute, but also other immigrant servicing nonprofits in the area that are stepping up to help immigrants get through these times. We're going to survive. We've been in this work for over 100 years, the International Institute has, before the government funded immigrants, through all the iterations of poor immigration policies during Japanese internment. IIA has been here serving new immigrant populations. Our values, our mission will not change. And I feel there are many agencies like ours throughout the United States that are stalwart. We are not going to give up because of threats coming out of the current administration. And that's really the call right now for most Americans and for even those who are immigrants,
To
right?
call it, it's an opportunity for you to step to the fore. I mean, all of us to step to
Yeah.
the forefront. And I think,
Together,
yeah,
collectively, because the collective power is very protective.
and to
Right.
push
Whereas
the
the
policy, you know,
individual out there dangling on their own is the one that's going to get detained and disappeared into a third country, right? So we need to be collective right now. And that's why, I started with power to the people. I think I could end with power to the people. Like, we have got to stand
yes,
up together against what this administration is doing, what local governors are doing, and what essentially the people are not really supporting. We can't overcome it. We're just going to have to put officials in office who deserve the job.
yeah. So for
And it's
people,
not
yeah,
about partisan politics. I frankly don't think it's about partisan politics. I do feel, meaning that the answer, there's no perfect answer on either side of, the party politics don't answer the question of immigration well, right? It has to be almost like reapproaching this with curiosity and like, what are the solutions, right? We cannot allow this to happen again. And we can't continue to allow it happen, which we've been doing for 20 some odd years, right? Probably longer than that, frankly. But I think the criminalization of immigrants has been happening for at least 2 decades, if not more. It's just been, getting more and more. The reason I said, you put anyone in handcuffs, they become a criminal, right? Is because the very first 2 weeks of ICE raids, all we were seeing were images of people in chains and handcuffs. And there was no evidence that they were,
right,
actually engaging in criminal conduct or had engaged in criminal conduct. There was no evidence of that. So I
right.
feel like we have an opportunity as a people collectively and local, like even Akron, Ohio, really, has to, I know there will be marches in our town on this Saturday for the No Kings March. I know that many people are called to march because they're opposing ICE. They're seeing what's happening in Chicago, in Los Angeles, and they know that
And
it's a
and
matter of time, right? And
on my,
Portland.
I mean, my county in Maryland is, I mean, up my street on my block. I think I shared the video of a friend of mine went to work at 6:30 at the community college 2 blocks from me at the medical center there at the hospital clinic there, and out the window as she's having her coffee, she sees ICE pull over these 2 guys, probably no warrant or anything like that, and arrested them right there, going into their car, doing a search, finding their passport, and we see, but there's enough of these that are out there and you can't turn away. So yeah, they are hitting, and I know in Canton, there was ICE was doing that too. And
They're
so,
doing this here too, by the way. And we have seen that. We actually have a local security company in Akron, Ohio. The owner of it, his last name is Ice. I'm not sure I believe this, but his last name is literally Ice. And so he is engaged in local um uh security, and his vehicles are marked ICE, and his armed His armed employees have ICE. It's so confusing. We've had so many false scares. They've actually had to feature him in the Akron Beacon Journal to explain that he's not actually ICE. I actually have a hard time believing that he wasn't marketing in that way on purpose.
Sure.
But in
Oh,
these times,
absolutely.
it's not
Yep.
serving him. And I do feel like, but we had ICE activity too, but it was very confusing to people. And I do have to say that, if people want to help, if they want to get involved, if they want
Right.
to make a difference, we are not community organizers. IIA, we're direct services. We provide, as I said, social services, legal services, English classes. There are volunteer opportunities. You can go to volunteer@iia.org. Donate because we are trying to put together nutrition and food resources for those people who are going to get kicked off of their SNAP benefits. So, go to iia.org and there's a donate
Yeah,
button, hit
well,
it,
we're gonna
donate.
put that in the notes. Uh, I'm gonna challenge you on that, Madhu. You are organizers because you're organizers in the sense of you are providing an opportunity for people. Not everybody is comfortable or wants to, for whatever reason, is going to be on the street. They feel like, okay, I don't know enough. I don't want to be on the street. I'm not a protester. I'm not I don't know exactly, but and I remember this in a religious institution that I was, an interfaith group that I was part of, where there was, people were, somebody was like, why are we making these political stands? And he was a Republican. And I said, but he was a fabulous teacher. And my other son loved him. And it's like, and he was young enough. He's like, why are people mad at him? I said, hey, there's a family who's, uh, parents work 3 jobs. Maybe they don't have their kids after school need tutoring. Can you help? And people will do it. Like everything doesn't have to be political. In fact, the political part of it is what's wrecking it. And that's what's going back to Zach Bryan. What the hell are they kicking these doors down? This guy just wants to go to freaking work. Like very, very basic. And so you guys are community organizers because by organizing your community and giving them the opportunity to do something that's easy. Everybody can buy pencils and give them to students. Anybody wants to tutor. People want to be part of something, but the problem is that, everything is explained so that if you don't have an activist mindset or you don't know what you're doing, and then this arguing, people can just like turn it off. But if you say, look, this family just came from Burma.
Either or though, right, Mark?
You know what?
I think I need people that have activist mindsets doing that work because
Yes,
we aren't doing that work. We are doing, um, providing direct services and we are obviously engaged in advocacy, which is very
yes,
different, right, from organizing. But I very much value our community members who are in the space of fighting the good
sure,
fight.
absolutely.
And holding politicians accountable because, um, in some ways, as a leader of a nonprofit that's funded by the state and the federal government, our hands are in some ways deeply tied, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
it's very valuable to have people who want to come to our space and understand our space is, you're right, putting together groceries and maybe pencils or whatever our item
Putting a
donations are,
sign in your
whatever.
window.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to a mechanic shop and you don't see the ice guy, which, I saw that you see that around the US, where people will have their, whatever the sign is on there, but you say, this business welcomes immigrants, something like that, then like that's part of the community. And you're absolutely right. I think what's great is that you guys are there and it's a presence and people have this opportunity to maybe, assist people in getting integrated into the society. And that's
These days
really,
it's survival. It's not even integration, right?
yeah.
It's literally survival right now. And I feel like many American communities are feeling that hard. And I suppose this has been a tough week in Ohio, because we are mobilizing and preparing for deep cuts in food assistance. And we know that the most vulnerable populations in our state are likely going to be hungry. And that I don't know how that's not heartbreaking, right? And our work and our mission is to be thinking ahead. We're not getting enough time to think ahead right now, but we are responding anyways. Not
Yeah,
reacting, but we're
Yep.
responding and we will continue to respond. And my goal is, I think I'm the first immigrant director of IIA. I think I'm the first immigrant that's actually served as the leader
You
of
don't
IIA.
know? You think?
Yeah. Thanks. Other
If
than the founder, right? And so I don't want to tank the
Mm.
organization under my leadership. So it's a call for help. Please help us uplift the values of local communities, really, and Akron, right? Which is to support and welcome immigrants into our community and
So it's
refugees.
money. You guys, donations is what you're really most in need of.
We need yeah, money donations, but also item donations because we put together resources for people at different times of year. If you go to our website, the asks are there, but click donate. It's the easiest way to just donate and sign up to be a monthly donor. It's my job to ask for that, but it's also the right thing to do right now. And I'm glad I have some voice and work that's deeply connected to making a difference. Because so many people want to make a difference right now, and I think there's many ways to do that. And if you need support and help in doing that, come, join us. Even if you're not from Akron, we welcome your support.
But yeah, and for people who want to call up their congressman, whoever, and just say, look, this is what's going on, make them aware, and people know you're aware of it. You want to be, yeah, there's all kinds of roles, and I mean, certainly the goal is that nobody should feel like it's beyond them, and nobody
Mhm.
should feel like they don't understand it. And nobody, wha- know that there is a cynical uh, set of information out there in order for certain people that are doing the rest of the things to the country to stay in power, and just leave it at that, like, and then worry about all the positive things, because we can, the Yiddish term, mishigash, all it's one of those, in Yiddish, the word sounds like what it is, but it's, your head scrambled by thinking of watching every single thing that somebody, the president says, or JD Vance says, and all that stuff. And it's like, you could turn that. I mean, Josh Rubin, who founded the Witness at the Border, who we had on from Alligator Alcatraz, retired and said, I was tired of yelling at the TV, and I got up and did something. And it's like, and he was an old retired guy in New York, and now he's sitting down there in 95-degree humid Florida, doing it. And you don't have to be that much, but you can do, there's a lot that can be done, and it's also uplifting. It really, because look, we're all personally, it's hard for all of us. It's psychologically hard to have this as our leadership, to have this as our representation around the world, and to have the expansion, the end, of authoritarianism. And it's hard because we feel more helpless, and the little things, it do make you feel a whole lot better. So, Madhu, we're gonna have you back. We'll get some updates when things get, can only look up. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Mark, do me a favor and light a candle next week for Diwali. It
Yes,
is the Festival of Lights, good over evil. So let's
we
do
will light a
something
candle.
symbolic
Yes, and
next week.
everybody out there, all of the non the Hindu listeners are already lighting them, but the for the well, and it's um Sikh holiday too, right?
Yes, yes, it's not just Hindu, correct. I'm actually part Sikh, so yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay. So there you go. So it's yeah. So there we go. So it's going to be a huge holiday, and hopefully people get rest from their work if they are. I mean, that's a thing. Are you getting time off?
Yeah, I'm taking the week off.
Good, good, good. Well, do that, enjoy, get some rest, and we'll talk soon. And thanks to everybody.
Good to talk to you, Mark.
All right,
Thank
bye bye.
you.